You know, for decades, anyone trying to seriously study UAPs has run into the same huge problem: a sea of blurry photos, shaky cell phone videos, and honestly, just unreliable stories. It's the ultimate needle in a haystack situation. So, how do you find something real in all that noise? Well, a new approach is trying to do just that by taking us, the unreliable humans, completely out of the picture. Let's get into it.
So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll talk about that big noise problem. Then we'll jump back in time to a plea from scientists that happened decades ago. We'll meet the founder whose entire life was shaped by that plea. And then we'll finally get to the solution he built, SID-1, and see how it all fits into the much bigger hunt for answers out there.
All right, so let's get right to it. The number one hurdle, the biggest headache for any serious researcher, is just trying to cut through the clutter. You have to separate the genuinely weird stuff from the tidal wave of misidentifications, fakes, and things that are just, well, normal. It's a massive signal-to-noise problem.
And here's the thing. The truth is, most things reported as UFOs are actually what researchers call IFOs. That's identified flying objects. Basically, these are all the things that, once you take a closer look, have a perfectly normal, even boring explanation.
Oh yeah, and the list of these usual suspects is, well, it's huge. We're talking about everything from the planet Venus, shining super bright in the sky, to weather balloons, drones, even big swarms of birds or insects. There are just so many things that can trick our eyes, especially when we see them from far away. And this is where you see two very different worlds colliding. In a place like Japan, you get a lot of media hype that creates what's described as a vicious cycle of wild claims that nobody ever checks. But then you look at the US, where the Department of Defense is actually taking this seriously. It really shows you why we need a solid, scientific way to look at this stuff. Now, you might think this whole push for a serious, data-first approach is something new, but nope, not at all. In fact, some of the most respected scientists were practically begging for this kind of investigation more than 50 years ago. Let's set the scene. The year is 1968, July 29th to be exact. The U.S. House of Representatives is holding a public hearing on UFOs, and this was a huge deal. You had top scientists standing up and telling Congress, hey, this is a real phenomenon, and it deserves real, objective science, not just ridicule. And one of the key voices there was Dr. Robert M. L. Baker. And wow, was this guy ahead of his time? He was literally proposing a detection and tracking system for UFOs and a rapid response science team to go check things out back in 1968. That idea was just decades ahead of the curve. And he wasn't alone. His colleague, Dr. James E. McDonald, an atmospheric physicist, didn't mince words either. He called for a much more aggressive scientific attack on the problem. The message from these guys was crystal clear. We have to stop guessing and start measuring. So you have these powerful words spoken half a century ago, and you might think they just kind of vanished into thin air. But they didn't. They traveled all the way across the world and landed in the mind of a young boy in Japan, a Mr. Kitajima. And for him, those words kicked off a lifelong mission. His whole journey really breaks down into three big stages. It all starts with that spark of inspiration he got as a kid from that 1968 hearing. Then he spent decades becoming a total expert in the tech industry. And finally, he brought it all together to fulfill his mission, founding the Space Phenomena Observatory Center. And we need to be clear here. This wasn't just some hobbyist tinkering in a garage. Mr. Kitajima was a heavy hitter at the very heart of the tech revolution. We're talking companies like Intel, Sun Microsystems, Netscape. He was right there, soaking up all the knowledge about computers and software he would eventually need to build this incredible machine. And all that experience, all that inspiration from his childhood, it all led to this, SID-1. It is the world's very first fully automated observation robot, designed from the ground up to capture UAPs with zero human intervention. And this right here is why this is such a game changer. On one hand, you've got your typical human sighting. It's subjective, people make mistakes, and you almost never get any hard, verifiable data. But then you look at SID-1, it's objective, it's automated, it's collecting a treasure trove of data, and it is watching the skies 24/7. It's just a totally different ballgame. So how does this thing actually work? Well, at its core, it's a network of super sensitive cameras hooked up to some powerful computers. But the real magic is the software. When it catches something, it doesn't just record a blurry video.
It logs everything: the exact GPS info, the time down to the millisecond, the angle, the azimuth, and even the weather conditions at that exact moment. This isn't an anecdote, it's a data package.
And of course, where you put these things is absolutely key. The SID-1 units are perched way up on these super high-rise towers around Tokyo Bay. This gives them a completely clear, panoramic view of the sky. It's all about maximizing the odds of seeing something extraordinary.
And this kind of serious search isn't just happening in a bubble. It's actually backed up by data coming from the US government itself. The Department of Defense hasn't just released its own UAP videos, they've openly said that a big chunk of their historical cases are still unidentified. And if you want a hard number on that, just look at the Air Force's famous Project Blue Book. It ran for 2 decades, looked at thousands of cases, and in its own final report, it concluded that nearly 27% of them could not be identified.
And this chart breaks it down perfectly. Yeah, lots of sightings turned out to be planes or stars, but that really significant slice of the pie, more than a quarter of all the cases they looked at, just stayed in the unidentified pile. That's the exact data gap that a project like SID-1 is trying to fill.
And this is where we kind of zoom out to the really big picture. Because what SID-1 is doing isn't just about spotting strange lights over Tokyo. It's about adding a piece of the puzzle to one of the most profound scientific searches ever: the hunt for extraterrestrial intelligence.
So, after all this work, all this tech, what's the real end game here? Where is this all leading?
Well, think about this number for a second. Scientists estimate there are over 100 million Earth-like planets in our Milky Way galaxy alone. When you're dealing with a number that big, a lot of researchers think the question isn't if there's life out there anymore. The real question is, how do we find it?
And that's the crucial shift that's happening. The conversation is moving away from just speculating to actually building a methodology. And one of the leading hypotheses is that an advanced civilization might send out probes to explore. The SID-1 project is basically built on that idea. Let's systematically search our own atmosphere for anything that might fit that bill.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating thought to end on. For centuries, we've looked up at the stars with our own eyes. But in this new age of data, of automation, of pure objectivity, could it be that our first verifiable proof that we have cosmic neighbors won't come from a person at all, but from a robot, just patiently watching the skies?